Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita, and I am the event planner for Microsoft Reactor India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. But before we begin today's session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat section will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. So please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat section. I would now like to welcome Saurabh, our speaker for today's session. Saurabh is a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft and is passionate about contributing to the community through tech sessions. He is also a researcher and a hackathon enthusiast. But for now, I will hand over to Saurabh to begin the session. Let me bring him into the stream. There
Hello,
you go.
Rashmita. How are you doing?
I'm doing all good. How are you, Saurabh?
Doing good as well. Hello, everyone.
Uh,
Good to meet you again. So, without further ado, let's get started with the session. And I'm so excited to introduce one of the very important as well as a crucial topic when you think about running your resources on the cloud, monitoring as well as backing up your Azure resources. So before we get started, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself to one who know me or who do not know me. So my name is Saurabh Bera and I'm a solution architect at Microsoft. I am a community speaker. I love to interact with the audience. I am a hackathon enthusiast and a lot more too. So would love to connect with each one of you. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to get started and I mean would look forward to connect with each of one of you. So, having said that, let's quickly jump to the topic of our interest. So, we have come a very long journey, and it has been a long journey since months that we prepared for Azure Administrator AZ-104 examination. And today, I'm so happy to introduce the last but not the least topic, monitoring and backing up Azure resources. So, having said that, I just have a quick icebreaker question for you. Well, why do you think it's crucial for businesses to have a robust monitoring? And also, organizations do focus on having a backup for the solution. Any workloads that you are running on Azure or any other platform, why do you need, or what are the different situations where you think you would probably need monitoring, as well as also ensure that a redundant backup setup should be there to ensure that your systems are available even in case of a downtime. So, just feel free to suggest those specific scenarios, and I would love to see them on the chat. I'll be watching on the chat for you guys to come up with your scenarios and suggestions. Would love to see each one of them. But before that, would love to get started with the topic of today, that is Azure Backup. Now, let's understand what is Azure Backup, what it has to provide, and why do we need backup as a solution on when we think about a cloud-based model. Obviously, cloud is a managed platform. Microsoft Azure is being managed by Microsoft, so why do we really need to think about backup, right? Now think about it as the same concept of the day one that we explained of the shared responsibility model, wherein Microsoft manages the infrastructure or I mean at some time the runtime or maybe the entire in the application altogether when it's a SaaS offering. Now, there is always a shared responsibility in the end user, the customer, as well as Microsoft, right? And that is where any data that you run on top of these infrastructures or any platform as a service, or any such configurations are something that the customer owns it, which means you have to have some way of the forms documented or have the data backed up so that you can easily replicate even if the primary data is not available. right? So that is where Azure Backup is a simple, secure, but cost-effective solution to back up your data. Now, what does this Azure Backup primarily focus upon? It's a wide set of, it covers a wide set of Azure services as well as non-Azure services as well, which we'll talk at a later point. But think of it as a centralized management interface or user interface that makes it easy to define how do you want to set up your backup, which we call as backup policies. What is the frequency? What is the retention? What are the resources that you want to protect? It can be an Azure virtual machine. It could be Azure Disk. It can be files and folders on your on-premise system. It could be SAP databases. It could be Azure files shares or maybe blobs and lot many more. So something that we'll explore as we go on. So I'm pretty sure now you understand what does Azure Backup means. But what does Azure Backup really cover? We talked about a couple of scenarios like Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Managed Disk, Azure File Share. We also talked about on-premise file shares or files and folders based backups as well. What else can it cover? So Azure Backup is a comprehensive cloud backup solution, which not only covers backing up resources on cloud, but it also manages something which might be in your hybrid environment, let's say on-premise or multi-cloud as well. So you can think about backing up of an Azure virtual machine, a VM in your on-premise, maybe an HCI cluster, a managed disk, file servers. Even you can think about SQL servers in Azure virtual machines. You can think about any SAP HANA databases. Even Azure database for PostgreSQL servers is being covered by Azure Backup, and something that we'll quickly explore. Azure Blobs, Azure database for PostgreSQL flexible server. This is a new addition to it. Azure database for MySQL flexible server, Azure Kubernetes cluster, and a lot more. So there's much to discuss over here, and with this is an enterprise backup solution, which means it provides multiple features, including multi-user authorization, multi-factor authentication, policy management, access control, soft delete, immutable backups, and all those things. So this is really helpful in a scenario where you need an enterprise backup solution. Now we talk about different types of backups that are supported or that you can do using Azure Backup. Now the first one that comes into my mind is a full backup. As the name suggests, a full backup means a full database backup, which means it covers entire database, or maybe if it's a disk, the entire disk a backup, or if it's a file shares, it covers the entire file share. And it's a comprehensive end-to-end backup of the data that is existing in your Azure resources. Now, when do you really need a full backup? Ideally, you would need one full backup, ideally per day or maybe a per week. These full backups may be used for compliance or retention purpose. Or let's say you want to quickly restore a full backup at a given point in time to the current state. So that is why you might use a full backup. Now, the second one, obviously there is a storage cost that is associated with the full backup. Just think you have 100 GB of data stored in an Azure VM, and every time that you take a full backup, you keep on adding to that 100 GB. It keeps on multiplying, right? So that's why there is a storage cost to it. Now think about if the customer says that, hey, I don't want to incur so much of storage cost. I want to ensure that my backup is comprehensive, but at the same time it does not keeps duplicated data. That's where we have a concept of differential backup. Now this differential backup means it is based on the initial full backup. You take an initial full backup, the next time Azure Backup will capture the backups, it will only capture the delta change in the data, which means, let's say at a current given point in time, Tx, you have certain data, and then at current point in time, Ty, only the differential data that exists between the two states is being captured as a differential backup. So only the change data gets captured. This helps avoid any deduplications. Also, saves on your storage cost. You can configure a differential backup to be triggered per day or maybe multiple times a day as well. right? Now that's where we talk about multiple backups per day. Now, Azure VMs, Azure Backup supports multiple VM based hourly backups with a minimum recovery point as 4 hours, which means you can schedule the interval time with a minimum of 4 hours and the maximum can be 24 hours. So, which means Azure Backup gives you the flexibility to to provide a Azure Backup policy. Now, backup policy is a rule set uh, of how do you want to configure your backup, and the backup schedule can be 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, and so on and so forth. Having said that, we also want to understand that Azure Backup also provides us selective disk backup. What does this mean? Now think about an Azure VM. It might have multiple data disk and a selective OS disk. Now we want to just back up, let's say, data disk 1, data disk 2, and 3, and so on and so forth. So it provides us the flexibility to choose what data is important for me within a particular resource and define a backup for only that selective disk. This is a very important, capability, which again serves a lot of scenarios. Now you can also, backup transactional logs. So a log backup basically is enables you a point in time restoration up to a specific period. So again, so this transaction log can be defined, and you can configure a transaction log backup for every 15 minutes. So this is again a very important thing. Now we understand what Azure Backup has to cover, what are the different types of backups that we can cover. Now we want to understand why do we need Azure Backup, and how does Azure Backup also helps with compliance. We talked about the long-term retention, right? So we want to understand how Azure Backup helps an enterprise with the compliance requirements. Now again, there are a few concepts that I want to talk over here. Access control mechanism, your retention types, on-demand backups, and policy management. So the first one, access control mechanism. Now again, where does your data get stored? Is it in a normal storage? Well, no. Azure Backup has a defined way of storing data, which means it stores the data in a vault, which is called as a recovery service vault or a backup vault. Now, these are specialized blob storage containers which can store the backup data. This has multiple capabilities like soft delete, multi-user authorization, also immutable storage, and much more to do with it. So you can define your data, you can store your data on these recovery service vaults, and you can manage their retention period and so on and so forth. The second thing is accessibility. Now you can define or you can configure your Azure Backup using the Azure portal for sure, using the Backup Center, something that I'll show you right away, using the Vault dashboards or even the SDK, CLI, or REST APIs as well. Now, very important thing, who can access the data? That's where the RBAC comes into the picture. RBAC means role-based access control. So you can restrict access to only authorized backup admins to configure or even perform any operations on backup. Just imagine a scenario if RBAC would not have been there. Somebody could easily go to my backup vault and delete all the backup. This is again a data loss for me. So I cannot afford that. And that's where I define only selective people to have backup operation or backup admin roles. Now, the second thing is retention types. Now, you could have two types of retention, either a short term retention, which can be used for some differential data backups, and a long term retention, which really helps with your compliance needs. So, organizations might have certain compliance requirements that you need to store the backup for 20 years, 7 years, or so on and so forth. So, for these long term retention, ideally, that is where you have the ability to store or define the retention period in your backup policy. Now, again, there are two types of backups. You can have on-demand backups as well as, a policy-defined backups. On-demand backup means you can take up an unscheduled or you can trigger an unscheduled backup at a given point in time. Otherwise, you can also define a backup policy, and based on that backup policy, it will take or it will create backups at the defined intervals. And again, policy is the key over here in backup, which actually defines helps you define the configuration that is required. So using Azure Backup policies, you can define the schedules, you can define the retention period, you can define what is the backup frequencies and so on and so forth to meet your compliance requirement. And this is where Azure Backup completely, in a holistic way, helps you to define your backups. Now, the next topic that we are going to talk about is protecting your VM using Azure Backup. Now, this is going to be a more like a hands-on session wherein I'll quickly give you a walkthrough of how can you get started with Azure Backup, how can you protect your resources using Azure Backup. Let me just quickly go to the portal. I hope you are able to see the screen, and let me just quickly show you a virtual machine that is running my database application right now. Now this DBVM is where I created a VM that hosts my SQL server or something like that. Okay, it could also, I mean, there could be other VMs as well, which would host my web applications, front end or APLS and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm primarily interested to back up my database VM for ensuring the data is secure and is backed up. Now, the first thing that I wanted to show you is the backup center. So this is your business continuity center. So I was talking about a single interface that can help you define or monitor and operate on how or what resources are being protected using Azure Backup. So this is the portal, the business continuity center. Now you can see the protectable resources, the resources that can be configured for an Azure Backup. The protected items, which means the items which are already being backed up, right? You see one of the VM, which is my web tier VM, is already being backed up by Azure Backup. Now, a very important thing, we talked about the recovery service vaults. So I'll just quickly show you the recovery service vaults. 1 minute. So if you see over here, so here, these are my recovery service vault. This is where I store my backups. 1 minute. So if you see over here, I can create or configure a backup. And I talked about the different scenarios, like it can back up Azure resources. It can back up Azure Stack Hub, Stack HCI, even on-premise resources. Let me give you an example of what are the different resources that can be backed up on-premise. It could be a files and folders. It could be Hyper-V virtual machines. It could be VMware, Microsoft SQL Server, SharePoint, Exchange, System State, Bare Metal Recovery, and a lot more. So again, this is very comprehensive indeed. So again, when you click on Azure, you will be able to see what are different Azure resources that it can back up, primarily virtual machine, file share, SQL databases, SAP HANA, and Azure VMs, and so on and so forth. So again, you can define where or what sort of a resource do you want to back up, and then you will be able to see the backed up items over here. So it shows me that the two storage Azure files are being backed up, while there is one virtual machine that is again getting backup. And I can define my backup policies over here. So let me give you a quick walkthrough of how do I protect my items. So I'll just quickly go to the business continuity center, and I will go to the I can define my own policies to govern what are the resources that I want to cover within backup. What are the different policies, or what are the rule set or configuration that I want to enforce, let's say in terms of the retentions and all those things. So again, these are really important thing to cater to. But I'll just quickly show you the protectable. I'll just quickly configure a backup for a VM, which is my database VM. So I'll click on this DB which is a protectable resource and not being currently protected. So I'll just click on this. And 1 minute. So I'll go ahead and click on configure protection. I'll select my resource type as Azure because it's an Azure VM, and then I'll select the type of VM. Is it a SQL in Azure VM? It's a normal Azure VM, right? So I'll just select Azure VM, and the solution that I want to use is Azure Backup. Now, Azure Site Recovery is a different concept that we'll talk about in a different conversation, but I'll select the vault wherein I want to store my backups. So there are two vaults. Maybe I'll select this one and select continue. And now I define my backup policy. So the policy type can be either enhanced or standard. You see the difference between the two: multiple backups per day, once a day backup, up to 30 days operational tier retention, up to 5 days of operational tier retention, supported for trusted launch Azure VMs, and support for VMs and with Ultradisk and Premium SSD. So I'll go with the enhanced for now, and I'll give it a name to my policy as DBVM backup policy. Yep. This looks good to me. Now I want to define the backup schedule. So do I want to create backup every 4 hours? Well, no, I want to create the backup every 8 hours. And the start time should be 8 a.m. in the morning, and it should repeat every 8 hours. What is the instant restore points? So retain instant recovery snapshots for 7 days, which means it will retain the recovery snapshots that we created as a part of the backup for the next 7 days. And then we define the retention period of the backups. So the retention period of the backups can be 30 days. I'll state is at 90 days based on my configurations or my backup policies. I can also configure a weekly, monthly, and yearly backups as well. Now, do I want to enable tiering? Enabling tiering helps me optimize my cost by defining the specific data that needs to be there in the Vault Archive tier. So the Vault Archive tier is meant for only only one-time write operation, and you don't need to, fetch the data on a regular basis. While a normal backup data is meant for to be stored in a hot tier, which is meant for continuous, read or write operations. Now, consistent types only, I can define only crash consistent snapshot, which means the VM is protected by backup policy and will not have any crash consistent snapshots generated. So, okay, I will create this backup policy, and I'll select a VM over here. So now, since I selected the crashed consistent snapshots, which you see over here, the consistency type, it will ensure that my backups are crash consistent. Which means any transactions that was real time being performed on that application, it will not get captured. So ideally, the the uncompleted transactions will not get captured, and only completed transactions gets captured. Now, again, there's different types of backups that we can define: application consistent, crash consistent, and so on. So now I want to select the particular VM that is of my interest, and I'll select that. So I've added that VM, and now I'll enable backup. So this is a straightforward process. Let me quickly spin it up. We'll wait for a minute. Meanwhile, if there's any questions, would love to take it up.
Saurav, there are few questions. I'll just get it up on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you
Can you
see the
tell
question?
us about the different types of backup? So, yeah, Gigi, so we talked about the different types of backup, which can be a full backup, a differential backup. You can take multiple backups per day. You can think about the defining the retention period of those backups. But primarily, when you talk about different types of backup, it is either a full or the differential backup. Now, again, I'll just pardon the same thing. So, the full backup means you take the entire data backup at the time. So that particular backup point or the specific backup which is being captured contains the entire end-to-end data. While a differential backup means it is based on the full backup. So you initially take a full backup, and the next time the repetitive backups that you take on a frequency will only capture the changed data, which means only the delta change in the data will be captured as a differential backup. I hope that helps. I again see a question from JJ. Which Azure resources needs the most backups? That's a good question. Well, any Azure resource that contains your critical data needs a backup. There's no direct definition to it, but any data on Azure, any workloads in Azure that is hosting your critical data, and which is something that is important to your organization, is critical and needs to be backed up. Ideally, we suggest to have backups for your critical application workloads. Are the backups saved in the same data center? I am interested in the location. If I have my resources in EU, Europe, for example, can I keep the backups on the same location? Well, that's a good question, Cosmin. So that's a very important ask from our customers that, hey, we have a GDPR compliance or we have certain compliance of an organization that we want to store the backups in the same region or within the same data center. Well, that is pretty much possible, as I already showed you that the recovery service vault, based on the location that you define for the recovery service vault, your backup gets stored there. So let's say I want to store my backup data in Europe, or maybe West Europe. I define my recovery service vault, which is the actual storage, to be in West Europe, and it will create my and store my backups there. I'll take up one more another question, and then we'll get back to the next steps. So, how would it be handled if the data was being changed during backups? Exactly. So, think about maybe I mean maybe some sort of an application that is continuously performing transactions, right? Now, when you talk about crash consistent, so the crash consistent means any data that is being written to the database before the backup is captured gets captured. Anything that is being written during the time of the backup will not get captured. There's a different also consistency, which is application consistent, which means if there is an operation that is going on during the backup process, it will wait, it will allow the operation to complete. Once operation has complete, it will take the backup, which means any transactions that are happening at that point in time are also get captured, and it's an application consistent backup. But we have just taken a crash consistent backup, which means the data is crash consistent. It's not application consistent. Application consistent means any transactions that are happening at that point in time also gets captured, which is not in this scenario specifically. Yeah. So with this, I'll just get back to the topic. I'll take up the next set of questions while we talk about the next topic. So just bear with me on that. So we have already backed up our VM, and I'll quickly show the protected items over here, backup items. And if you see the stored Azure virtual machine that are being backed up is my DBVM as well. Now it says warning, initial backup pending, which means that the initial backup has not been triggered. You remember my the timeline that I mentioned in my backup policy. It's trigger in backup every 8 hours at 8 a.m. in the morning. So again, we have already, and that time is yet to come, and that's where the backup has not been triggered as of now. Now I'll quickly show you how I can also trigger an on-demand backup. So let me go to the business continuity center. I'll go to protected items. I'll show you how we can quickly create an on-demand backups as well. Just a minute. Yep. So over here, if you see the DBVM is already being backed up, and I'll trigger a manual on-demand backup over here. 1 minute. Uh, Okay. So if you see over here, it says the primary region pending protection because it has not captured the backup as of now. If you see, the secondary region is not protected because obviously my recovery service vault is not replicated across regions, which means there are three levels of redundancy that you can define in a recovery service vault. LRS, a locally redundant storage. GRS, ZRS, zone redundant storage, and GRS, which is a geo redundant storage. A locally redundant storage means it is local to a data center. A zone redundant storage means it is replicated, the data is being replicated across two zones and it is being managed by a recovery service vault. When you talk about the GRS, it is being replicated across two different regions. Think about Central India and South India as two different regions. So the data gets replicated across these two regions. So again, I'll just quickly show you 1 minute. Protection policies. So DBVM, here is my policy that I defined. I can modify that policy, and I can see the associated items. I can define different level of tierings as well. So here is my associated item, and 1 minute. I'll go to the recovery service vault. I'll select my recovery service vault and backup items. DBVM. Okay. So now I can manually trigger a backup on demand backup by clicking on backup now. And I can define the retention. So ideally, when up till when do I want to retain that on demand backup? It's something that I discussed in this slide before. Again, once I've backed it up, the last backup status will show succeeded, and the latest restore point will show up over here. I can using that backup. I can restore a VM. I can stop a backup at a given point in time. I can delete the backup, or I can also resume the backup. So all of these operations are possible. Now, having said that, we had a good, glimpse of what are the different things that we can use. How we can configure a backup for an Azure virtual machine. So the next step is to talk about Azure Monitor. So monitoring is a really important topic when you talk about any resources on Azure, be it networking, virtual machines, IS resources, PaaS resources, and so on and so forth. So again, what is Azure Monitor? So Azure Monitor is a comprehensive set of monitoring services that not only encapsulates Azure resources but even beyond. Now, what are the different things that are included, or what are the key activities that are included within Azure monitoring? Now, if you see the diagram over here, I'll just quickly bring up my highlighter. 1 minute. So over here, if you see the diagram, it is these are my workloads. It could be in apps, it could be workloads, it could be infrastructure, Azure platform, or even any other databases as well. So, or it could be also custom sources as well. Now, Azure Monitor is the actual resource service that captures metrics, logs, traces, and changes, and it displays it into a particular insights. And this is where I'll talk about the different steps or activities that are being performed by Azure Monitor. Now, the Azure Monitor as a service collects the data, which means it captures the metrics, logs, log traces to provide insights and the data to perform the querying upon. Now you can, the next step is performing data analysis. which means it captures the data and understand the current state of the particular resource, predict any potential issues or any critical uh, I mean anomalies, identify patterns, trends, and so on and so forth. Now, again, the next step, once it has already performed the data analysis, what is the next step that Azure Monitor does? It can trigger an alert. Now, what does alert mean? Now, alert means when a specific condition is met, let's say the CPU percentage or memory usage went above 90%, or if an expressed out bandwidth usage has exceeded 95%, that could be a potential alert for an organization, or maybe the disk space is low. So that is where the alerts get triggered to the resource owner or to a specified individual that you define in the alert. We'll walk you through everything as we go ahead. So this helps the specific administrator or the resource owner to take the necessary action once an alert has been triggered. What else does Azure Monitor can do? So it can provide you insightful visualizations, present collected data, and present it into a user-friendly visual formats. Let's say a chart, a pie chart, bar, and so on and so forth. It can provide the necessary critical logs, data. It can provide allow you to perform queries and show you the relevant data. Further, the one of the most important step or one of the most important functionality of Azure Monitor is also to provide you diagnostics and troubleshooting capabilities. Now imagine you collect all these logs, the metrics, the logs, traces, and the changes. What are the key item that we are doing once an incident has already happened? That is where we are using these logs, metrics to analyze what was the root cause, or why did a particular action or a particular resource behaved in a particular way at a given point in time. So this is where we use the logs data, we use the metrics data to understand how our Azure resources are behaving and perform any such configuration as per the requirement. Now we talked about two things primarily, metrics and logs. Let's dive deep into each of them. As the name suggests, metrics are quantifiable measurement that shows a snapshot of an application or maybe a resource performance. Now metrics differs widely across multiple Azure services. In a layman's term, I define metrics as any quantifiable or quantitative unit. Let's say if you traverse a distance using your car, a car may be a service. What could be the metrics? The metrics could be the fuel consumed, the distance traveled, and the time that it took to travel that particular distance. These are the specific metrics. Similarly, a virtual machine would have a CPU usage, memory usage, network latency, maybe ingress traffic or inbound traffic, egress traffic or outbound traffic, right? The number of bits processed per second, or the IOPS and so on and so forth for any other resources. So again, these are metrics are like quantifiable units or measurements for different services across different fields or matrices. Okay, so again, now what are logs? While I said metrics are quantifiable measurement, which means it would ideally reflect a time series number or maybe it could be a numerical data. Logs did not need to be a numerical data. It can be a textual record of events. It could be some actions being performed on your resources. It could be also messages from your trailing resources environment as well. It could be numerical, it could be textual, it could be anything, and it could be also unstructured. Now the primary difference between metrics and logs is logs are could be inherent to a particular service, and it can provide some contextual information about the different events or activities that are being happening in your resource level or service level. Now metrics are data or measurable quantities that are being continuously being monitored and captured by a service. It could be monitoring in Azure Monitor or Prometheus or any other tool. Now, we talked about the data that is being captured, but what do we do up with this data? That is where we do a lot of things using this data. We can query the data, we can perform diagnostics and troubleshooting. And one of the very important thing that allows or provides an additional leverage to users of Azure is the Azure monitoring insights and visualizations and the actions that you can perform on top of it. So when I talk about Azure Monitor, let me just go to the Azure portal and I'll just quickly show you. So I head over to and just type in Azure Monitor. Oops. I'll just type in simply monitor, and there you go. So this is my Azure Monitor default page, and over here, when you see, I talked about the insights, right? These are the different set of insights that you can see. Again, detection. There are several tools that you can leverage for detection, triage, and diagnostics that you can see within Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor does also have Managed Prometheus as an option. So now the primary thing that I want to talk about is this, the insights that you see on the left pane. There are different types of insights that Azure Monitor does provide and which you can leverage. Let's say virtual machine. So virtual machine has a separate insights, and I can configure insights for a set of virtual machines. 1 minute. I'll just quickly show you that. Not monitored. Let me just enable this. Enable Azure Monitor insights. And once I configure the insights, it will capture the diagnostics logs from my specific resource, and which is being fed into a log analytics workspace. A log analytics workspace is where your logs data gets stored. Now, once that logs data is getting stored in the log analytics workspace, this VM Insights or virtual machine insights is continuously querying that data to provide the relevant insights to me as an end user. So something that we can check. 1 minute. So I'll just quickly show you, let's say, storage account as well. I'm not sure if I have enabled an insights for, okay. So if you see over here, these are the different transactions, transaction timeline, end-to-end latencies, server latencies, and so on and so forth. So again, these are different insights that a user might want to see, and or maybe an organization might want to see. Since the sandbox environment, I just see a limited set of resources. Again, from an application standpoint as well, if I have certain app services or applications, again, I can use or I can configure insights for them by going to application insights. I can see application maps, smart detections. There are different things that I can see over here, and I can use it to perform diagnostics, perform insights onto how my application is behaving on a given particular point in time. So this shows my ability and so on and so forth. Again, from networking, a very important thing, Network Insights provides you a very detailed, comprehensive insights onto the different networking resources, the availability, how are the connectivity happening, what is the traffic that is passing through these networks, and so on and so forth. So imagine if you have a express route circuit, so you would like to understand how the different data is traveling through these resources. Again, for Cosmos DB's keywords, and this is something that I'll open up for you to explore. Long Linux Workspace is something that we talked about, is your primary central storage for storing your logs data. So let's say I define a log analytics workspace over here, which is in EastQS2. This is capturing my logs data for, let's say, some applications and something like that, and which can be further used to query some data. So over here, if you see these insights that is coming up. Now, one more really important thing to talk about, okay? The VM Insights has been configured, but it will take some time to show up the data as the logs capturing will happen, and only then will the VM Insights be able to show the required data. Okay, so I'll just quickly give it a try. There you see there's no data that has come up as of now since I provisioned it right away. So over here, these are the different things that I want you to know. And let's get back to the slides. For people who have questions, just bear with me. I'll come to your questions right away. Now, how do you perform improved incident response with Azure Monitor alerts? We talked about Azure Monitor alerts, and these are very crucial for administrators, resource owners, or even incident managers to understand how or when did a particular anomaly or particular condition was met, and what is the action that you need to perform, and this is what you can achieve using Azure Monitor. Now when you talk about Azure Monitor, there are a couple of things that you need to talk, I mean, you need to configure and you need to also provide information on. So the resource that you want to monitor. The second is the condition. So the Azure Monitor alert will only get triggered when a particular given condition is met. So you define the condition, let's say CPU metrics is greater than 90%, then you trigger an alert. If the memory usage is greater than 70%, then you trigger an alert and something like that. What is the action that you want to take? So let's say the alert condition is already met and it triggers an alert. So what sort of an action do you want to take on that particular alert? Do you just want to send an email notification or an SMS notification? While you can also do a set of automated tasks as well using action groups, which defines either you can trigger an automation runbook, you can trigger a logic apps that perform certain operations, and so on and so forth. And again, these alerts can be, provided as the different levels of severity, like 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 0 being the critical, and 4 being the verbose. Now we'll quickly show you how to configure the alerts, but we'll talk about the different types of alerts. The first one, and something that we use very widely, is the metrics-based alerts. Now, as the name suggests, these metrics-based alerts are based on the metrics. So you define a particular condition in the alert based on the specific metrics. CPU usage might be a metric, memory usage, or maybe a disk IOPS might be a metric. Now, while you create a metric alert, there are a couple of things that you need to understand. You can define a static alert. You can also define a dynamic alert as well, wherein you use a machine learning to adjust thresholds. You do not define a hard and fast condition. Again, the alert compositions can also vary. You can define your condition type as static or dynamic, something that we discussed, your statistical analysis, and evaluation frequency. How frequently do you want to evaluate that particular condition to be matched? Again, your scaling alerts is also very important key over here. So you can have multiple resources that are being monitored under the same metrics or multiple metrics in one region. You can also define individual alerts per resource that has its own alerts being defined. Now, the second type of alert that you can define is log search alerts to identify any alerts at a workload level or application events level. Now, something we talked about, so logs are being continuously captured. Metrics are also something that is being captured by Azure Monitor. Now, you can define a alert on the metrics, which is called as metric alerts. You can define an alert on logs levels, which can be called as log search alerts. Now these log search alerts have a similar thing. So you can define the time range for that query, the frequency, the threshold, and the actual log query when which actually triggers the alert. Now another important thing that you can do is defining activity log alerts. Now, don't get confused with the log search alert and activity log alerts. There is a contrast or a difference between the activity logs and the other log that we called about, the application level logs. So the workload or application level logs are something that is specific to your workloads, while activity logs are your end operations that you're performing on the portal, or any administrative or any operations that you're performing on Azure directly. It could be at a service level, it could be subscription level, it could be management level. I'll quickly show you what are the different activity log alerts and where do you see this. So again, you can define the activity log alerts. Let's say a particular user deleted the backup recovery service vault. Okay, So that is where you can define an alert. You can define an alert when a particular VM gets assigned a public IP, and so on and so forth. So all of these different operations that you perform on the Azure, either be it a verbose, informational, warning, error, or critical, even if it's, let's say, a deployment fails, you can define an alert that gets triggered to you, or maybe an email gets triggered to you, or an SMS, or some other actions. So I'll just quickly show you on the Azure portal how does it look like. Okay, so I'll go to my home. I'll quickly go to my Azure monitor. Now, the first thing that I want to show you is activity logs. So now, if you see, this is the activity log at my Azure monitor level. Okay, I'll just quickly show you last 2 weeks apply. Let's see if I have any logger. I do not, I guess. Or maybe I'll go to my subscription and then I'll show you. So at any, I mean, at a resource level, subscription level, even at management group level as well, you will see these activity log alerts. These are operations or different events that are happening on your Azure resource level. So let's quickly select my subscription and this is just a sandbox environment. And then you see what are the different activity logs that has been done by the users of this subscription. So if you see create deployments, let's say update deployments, any failed deployments, the different status, the time, the timestamp, event, and in the user who initiated this particular event. Again, audit policy action, if there's any policy that got triggered, any policy that is not being avoided, all of these scenarios are being covered within activity log alerts. These are different logs that you see. Activity logs, again, you can define an alert on these activity logs as well. Something I was talking about was metrics, right? Metrics based alerts. And again, each service would have their own set of metrics that you can check upon. Let's give an example. I select one of the VM. I'm not sure which subscription. I select a particular resource. It could be resource group, and stuff like that as well. I'll select it. Now, this is a VM, right? So metric namespace is virtual machine host. Now, these are the different metrics that you see: CPU credits consumed, CPU credits remaining, disk data disk bandwidth consumed, data disk IOPS consumed, disk latency, max burst bandwidth, max burst IOPS, queue depth, discrete bytes, network in, network out, and so on and so forth. There are multiple alerts metrics that can be configured or that are defined for a particular service. And again, this is just for VM. For other services, the metrics would be different altogether. Now, I can define a metric-based alert on top of this using alert rules. So let me show you quickly of defining an alert. Let's say I select that same database VM. I'll go to my compute.g and I'll select my DBVM, apply. So this is the resource I selected. I could have selected multiple resources as well on which I want to define that alert. Now I select a condition on of what type of alert do I want to create. So I select a metric because this is a metric based alert. So let's say I want to see if the available memory bytes is greater than. I can define a dynamic threshold type, I can define a static threshold type. I'll go with the static one now. The aggregation types couldn't be average, it could be max, it could be min and total, and so on and so forth. I'll keep it average. Value is greater than. Threshold will be currently it is how much. This is in bytes, so 1 minute. Okay, so it is altogether 1 Gbps. If it exceeds 1 Gbps, I can make it to exceed maybe 3 Gbps and so on and so forth. Okay. So similarly for different uh, alerts type, I see. Okay, I need to add. Yep. So if you see over here, if the aggregation is more than 3 Gbps, it will trigger an alert. Okay, so similar to that. So you can define your own metrics alerts. You can define multiple conditions. You can check. You can define when to evaluate. So when to evaluate, check every 1 minute. I want it to be checked every 1 minute or maybe 5 minutes, and so on and so forth. Look back period is 5 minutes. I'll make it as 15 for now, or maybe let's keep it to 5 minutes for now. And I can define multiple conditions as well of my actions. And then there's an action. So let's say the alert already got triggered. What is the next step that we want to perform? That is where we define the action groups. Okay, you can either choose a quick actions. So you can define our automation runbook. You can define an email. You define to send a notification on the mobile apps, and so on and so forth. But I'll create an action group and I'll quickly show you how this looks. So let's say I create an action group. Now this action group can define multiple activities that I can do. So I'll just go to compute RG and I'll select the region as global. I'll give it a name as dbvm action group, right? I'll put the display name as the same. Next notification, what does it show now? As 11. Okay, I'll make it small. dbvm which sounds good to me. Next action is, what are the notification type that I want to perform? So either an email or an email, SMS, or push notification. So I'll just go to email and I'll define my email ID. Okay, something like this. Okay, and does not really matter. So again, I'll just maybe delete this. I don't want to provide my email over here. And the next action that I want to perform, action means what is the actual, it can be the previous was notification, it could be an email, SMS, push notification, and so on and so forth. The action is what sort of an action do you want to, again, this is optional. So you can run an automation run book, you can trigger an Azure function, you can trigger an event hub, or an ITSM logic app, webhook, and so on and so forth. Maybe I can quickly select one of them, maybe a logic app, and I define which logic app do I want to select. So I can define my own logic app as well. Consumption tier. 1 minute. I do not have a logic app over here. Let me see if I do have any. But I just wanted to show that I might not have a logic app directly available over here. So you can select a logic app that gets triggered only when that alert gets triggered. And then finally, you can define your tags for the action groups and you can review and create, right? So again, you need to define a particular action group or an action to perform upon. Let me just provide this email SMS so that I can create this action group. Okay, so next action, and I'll delete these actions over here because this does not make sense to me. Okay, here I go, and I'll just create the actions and review and create. So this is all. This is what I wanted to show. So I can create an action group, and then finally I can provide any further detail. I can define the severity level. I'll maybe say it as a warning and give it a alert rule name as well, which can be dbvm alert mem alert. Okay, so similarly, this can be the rule description as well. And I go ahead and I can review and create. As simple as that. So this really helps solve my problem. So I can define an alert. There's a one-time activity, and each time the particular condition is met, it will trigger me an alert. So if you see over here, it should show up in a minute. Yeah. So this was a straightforward process. I will take any questions if there are any. and then we'll move to the next part of it. We are using the vaults to save the backup of the resource like Azure VM. Sunil, was that a statement or was that a question? Okay, so it's a question. We are using the vaults to save the backup of the Azure resources. Like, yes, we are using an Azure Recovery Service Vault. So there are two types of vaults on Azure. It can be a backup vault. It could be an Azure a Recovery Service Vault as well. So you're using the Azure Recovery Service Vault for storing the backups of the resources like an Azure VM, files, or it could be anything as well. Yeah. What are the retention policies available in Azure Backup, and how do they affect storage consumption? Well, that's a great question, Chandra. So the retention policies are various, and you can define it at multiple levels. You can define a daily retention policy. You can define a weekly retention policy, a monthly, or a yearly. Which means if there is a weekly backup, you define a weekly retention policy. If there is a daily backup, you define a daily backup policy, retention policy, and so on and so forth. So again, you can customize the retention policy based on your organization needs. It can be ranging something around 0 to 7 years or even more as well, what I understand. So again, the storage cost or the storage consumption is directly proportional to your retention period or the actual storage that you are using in your recovery service vault. So your costing would be directly proportional to that. So ideally, the best practice is to define a proper retention policy as per your company standard, so that you do not end paying more than what you expect. Mhm. If backup pre-check with failed, how can we able to resolve it? So the pre-check on backup usually define is being defined by the if there are agents, there are multiple parameters to it. If that resource is configurable, if there is an agent installed to it, and so on and so forth. If probably the pre-check has failed, just dig onto that particular the error and identify what is the root cause of it. It might be due to that the agent is not running properly or is not configured. So maybe a quick action over there would be to enable the VM with that particular agent. By default, any Azure VM already has that agent already installed. For any other database or SQL Server VMs as well would also have those agents installed into it. Yeah. How is backups related to the Azure or to the automated zone redundancy? Are we defining how often the zone redundancy takes place using the backup policies, or are these two completely different? So these are two completely different, JJ, and that's a good question to ask. My backup zone redundancy is being defined by the storage unit for that backup, which is recovery service vault or backup vault. So at a recovery service vault level or a backup vault level, I define what is the replication that I want to perform. Is it a locally redundant? Is it a zone redundant? Or is it a geo redundant replication? While my backup policy defines how do I want to configure the backup. Configure the backup as in the frequency, the schedule, the retention, and so on and so forth. Next. Are the alerts expensive to be set up? Well, no, that alerts are not expensive to be set up. I think I do not have an exact numeric figure on the costing, but for sure, you can check this on the pricing calculator. So you can go over here, and few of them are also, you can just go over here and you can type in as Azure Monitor. 1 minute. And you can check on the costing for it. So primarily for Azure Monitor, if you see alert tools over here, you can define and you can check what is the cost for it. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Feel free to reach out if in case you further have any question on that part. Yeah. Any other questions? What do you think about creating an alert on a business issue? You can do it but would you recommend it, or we should use alerts only on technical issues? Well, Cosmin, that's again a good question to ask. I would say if you can configure alerts for any issue as well. I don't understand when you say a business issue, what is the exact context? If that can be configured as an alert, well, that really solves my problem, because I do not have to come to the portal and check every time if there is an issue. Uh, Ideally, for technical issues, you do have alerts, but at the same time, if you can also configure alerts for any business issues. Let me give an example of a business issue. If the RPO reaches more than 4 hours, okay, which means your application time is exceeding 4 hours, so that is where you can configure an alert. This means that your backup policy does not have a policy that has interval time of 4 hours or more. So I mean, you should define uh, policies or configurations as per your needs, and you can have backup policies as per your needs, and you can define an alert or even an Azure policy. There's something called an Azure policy that sets up a rule set or a guardrail for you to prevent creating a resource which is of a particular configuration that is not needed. Let's say you define that all my backup policies should have a minimum frequency of 8 hours. So this is something, when you define an Azure policy, you enforce it. So every users have to create a backup policy which has backup frequency of less than 8 hours. So something like that you can use to solve your problem. Hope that helps, Cosmin.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Saurav. I think that's about it. And with that, it's a wrap for today's session. Thank you so much for hosting another session. And folks, please note that was the last session from this series. However, we'll come up with another one. So do check out our Reactor website for more upcoming sessions. Also, we would appreciate your feedback on today's session, as it will help us sort of to curate the future series if he wished to come back, which I would love him to come back on the Reactor platform. But yes, please scan the QR code and do share your feedback about today's session. How did you like? The event ID is 25473. And please feel free to use the Learn module link. This will give you access to additional resources to take your learning further. Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day.